In the town of Ashford, population 3,912, there was a bench that everyone knew. It sat on the east side of the square beneath an old sycamore tree whose pale, mottled bark peeled away in curling strips like old paper. Its roots had pushed the bricks upward over the years, creating uneven ridges that people stepped over without thinking, the way people step over history without noticing it's still there. The bench itself had once been painted a cheerful green. Now the paint clung in thin, stubborn patches, and the rest had faded to a tired gray, the wood beneath worn smooth by weather, time, and the quiet weight of waiting. Every morning at exactly 9:15, Eleanor Whitcomb sat there. She arrived with the same careful steps, her sensible shoes touching the brick with quiet certainty. She wore the same brown wool coat regardless of season. In winter, it blended with the dead grass. In summer, it absorbed the heat. The elbows had been patched with darker fabric, stitched with hands that knew how to make things last. Her white hair was pinned back in a style that had not changed since 1968, each strand held in place with deliberate dignity. Her purse rested in her lap, both hands folded over it. And she watched the bank. Not the way people watch buildings, the way people watch graves. Ashford Community Bank stood across the street, its red brick face glowing warmly in the morning sun, its white columns polished and proud, its windows reflecting a town that had forgotten what they used to reflect. People passed Eleanor constantly. Ashford was small enough that everyone noticed everything, but large enough that they pretended not to. A pair of high school girls walked past one morning, their backpacks slung over their shoulders, their voices low but not low enough. "She's here again," one whispered. "She's always here," the other replied. "Why?" The first girl shrugged. "My mom says she's lonely." They kept walking. Eleanor did not react. Later, a man named Carl Jensen passed by carrying a paper cup of coffee and the exhaustion of a hardware store owner. "Mornin', Mrs. Whitcomb," he said gently. She nodded. "Mornin', Carl." He hesitated, glancing at the bank. "You staying cool enough out here?" "I've been through hotter summers," she said. Carl smiled politely, though he didn't understand what she meant. He never did. An older woman, Martha Ellery, stopped one afternoon, her voice full of careful sympathy. "You know, Eleanor, you don't have to sit out here every day." Eleanor looked at her. "I know." Martha waited. Eleanor said nothing more. Martha eventually nodded and walked away, her shoes clicking against the bricks like punctuation. Some people didn't speak to her at all. They simply looked, and then looked away. A young mother once pulled her child a little closer as they passed. "Who is that?" the child asked. The mother hesitated. Then she said quietly, "Just someone who remembers things." The child didn't understand, but Eleanor heard. She heard everything. Every whisper, every assumption, every quiet dismissal. She heard the man in the pressed shirt mutter to his wife, "It's sad, really." She heard the teenager say, "She's probably waiting for someone." She heard the mail carrier tell the grocer, "She's been sitting there longer than I've been delivering mail." They all thought the same thing, that she was waiting for something that wasn't coming. They were wrong. Eleanor Whitcomb was not waiting. She was watching. Watching the doors. Watching the windows. Watching the man inside who had taken everything and believed time had buried the truth with her husband. At 9:47 every morning, Harold Bennett's car pulled into the reserved space beside the bank. Black, shining, untouched by dust. He stepped out in polished shoes that reflected the sun. He never looked at her, not once, not in 42 years. To him, she was part of the scenery. A fixture. A shadow. A woman the town had quietly filed away under forgotten things. And every morning, Eleanor watched him walk inside the building that used to bear her name. Her hands rested calmly on her purse. Her face revealed nothing. But inside her purse, inside her home, inside her memory, was the truth. And in Ashford, population 3,912. truth had a way of outliving everyone who tried to bury it. 42 years earlier, the bank had smelled like fresh varnish, paper, and the fragile beginning of something that mattered. The floors gleamed with a shine that had taken Thomas 3 nights to finish himself, long after the painter had gone home. He hadn't trusted anyone else to do it right. He stood behind the front counter now in his white shirt sleeves, his tie loosened, his hair slightly damp with nervous sweat, his hands resting on the polished wood as if he needed to feel it was real. Sunlight streamed through the tall front windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted lazily through the air, turning the entire room into something almost sacred. Eleanor stood near the door, watching him, watching the way he breathed, watching the way his eyes moved across the room like a man memorizing a face he loved. "We're really doing this," he said. His voice carried both wonder and fear. Eleanor smiled gently. "We already did," she said. He let out a quiet laugh, the kind that escaped when someone stood at the edge of something too big to understand. She walked toward him slowly, her fingers brushing along the counter, feeling every nick and grain in the wood. "You built this with your own hands," she said softly. Thomas shook his head. "We built it." He reached for her then, his fingers wrapping around hers, his grip warm and firm and slightly trembling. She could feel his pulse. Fast. He swallowed. "I need you to know something," he said. She tilted her head. "What?" He hesitated. Not because he didn't know, because he felt too much. "I was afraid," he admitted quietly. She frowned slightly. "Afraid of what?" He looked around the empty bank. "At night, when it was just me here, sanding the floors, fixing the trim." He exhaled slowly. "I kept thinking, what if I fail you?" Her expression softened instantly. "Thomas?" But he shook his head. "No, let me say it." His thumb moved gently over her knuckles. "You deserved a safe life," he said. "A predictable life. And instead, I gave you risk." He looked down, ashamed of something she had never blamed him for. "I put everything we had into this building. Every dollar, every hour, every promise." His voice dropped to a whisper. "And I kept thinking, what if one day you look at me and wish I hadn't?" Eleanor stepped closer. She placed her free hand against his cheek. His skin was warm, real, certain. "I have never wished that," she said. His eyes met hers, searching, needing to believe her. She smiled. "You didn't build this bank instead of loving me," she said softly. "You built it because you loved me." His eyes filled slightly, though he would never have called it tears. "I wanted to give you something permanent," he admitted. "You did." He shook his head faintly. "No, I mean something that lasts longer than we do." He looked around again. "This town, these people, they trust us." He swallowed. "That trust, it's terrifying." She smiled gently. "It's supposed to be." He let out a small breath of laughter. "I don't care about the money," he confessed. She knew that was true. "I care about being worthy of the way they look at us." He hesitated. "And the way you look at me." Her fingers tightened against his hand. "You have always been worthy of me," she said. His voice cracked slightly when he spoke again. "I built this place so that one day, when I'm gone..." He stopped. The words hung between them. She didn't want to hear them. He forced himself to continue. "You would still have something that proves I was here." Her eyes filled now. "You are not a building," she said quietly. "No," he agreed. "But this building carries my love for you inside it." He gestured around them. Every board, every nail, every decision. His voice softened. "This bank belongs to the town." He squeezed her hand gently. "But it exists because of you." She leaned into him then, resting her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "I don't need a building," she whispered. He wrapped his arms around her. I know, he said, but I needed to give you one anyway. They stood there like that for a long time. Two people holding each other inside a future they believed they controlled. Outside, the town moved forward, unaware of how fragile everything truly was. And inside that small, sunlit bank, Thomas Whitcomb loved his wife with the quiet, desperate hope of a man trying to build something that death could not take away. He did not yet know. That death would not be the thing that stole it. Harold Bennett arrived in Ashford in early October, when the trees had begun to turn but hadn't yet committed to dying. He came in a car that was too clean for the roads it had traveled. Black, polished, reflective in a way that suggested it had never known hardship. Eleanor noticed the car before she noticed him. It sat outside the bank, like a visitor that had no intention of becoming a resident. When he walked through the door, he carried himself with the careful confidence of a man who had practiced being liked. His suit fit perfectly, not new, not flashy, intentional. Mr. Whitcomb, he said warmly, extending his hand. Thomas shook it immediately. Eleanor watched from her desk. She noticed how Harold's eyes moved, not resting, not settling, measuring. He looked at the counters, the vault door, the windows, the distance between things, not admiring, calculating. I've heard wonderful things about this bank, Harold said. Thomas beamed with pride. We do our best. Eleanor said nothing. Harold's eyes shifted to her. And you must be Mrs. Whitcomb. His voice softened slightly when he said it, as though he understood how to adjust himself for sympathy. She nodded once. His handshake was firm, dry, controlled. He did not squeeze too tightly. He did not linger. He let go at exactly the right moment. It was a perfect handshake, and Eleanor distrusted it immediately, because men who felt things rarely shook hands perfectly. They held too long, or not long enough. They revealed themselves in small mistakes. Harold made none. Over the next weeks, he returned often, always polite, always respectful. He asked questions, so many questions. How many active accounts? What's your average loan term? What percentage of clients are agricultural? Thomas answered eagerly, proudly. Eleanor watched Harold listen. He never interrupted, never disagreed, never challenged. He simply absorbed, like water finding cracks in stone. One afternoon, after Harold had left, Eleanor stood beside Thomas at the counter. You told him everything, she said quietly. Thomas smiled. He's investing. She tilted her head. He's studying. Thomas laughed gently. That's what investors do. She didn't argue, but she remembered the way Harold had stood in the vault doorway. Not impressed. Not curious. Possessive. Like a man imagining furniture in a house that wasn't his. Another time, she brought coffee into Thomas's office while Harold was there. They stopped talking when she entered. Not gradually. Immediately. Thomas smiled too quickly. Harold smiled too calmly. She handed Thomas his coffee. Harold declined. I never drink caffeine during business discussions, he said. His tone was pleasant, but his eyes stayed on Thomas, not her, as if she were not part of the discussion, not part of the bank, not part of the future he was imagining. That night, she said to Thomas in their kitchen, He doesn't see me. Thomas looked up from his paperwork. What do you mean? She hesitated, searching for words. He sees you. He sees the bank. He sees the numbers. She paused. But he doesn't see the people. Thomas frowned slightly. He's just focused. Eleanor shook her head faintly. No. She remembered the way Harold had watched Mrs. Galloway earlier that day. Mrs. Galloway, who had come in to deposit her late husband's insurance check. She had been crying, her hands shaking. Thomas had walked around the counter and helped her fill out the forms himself. Harold had watched silently, Not uncomfortable, not sympathetic, interested. Later, he had asked Thomas, "Does emotional attachment often influence your lending decisions?" He had said it like a scientist observing an animal, not a man witnessing grief. Eleanor had felt cold when she heard it. Back in the kitchen, she told Thomas, "He doesn't love this town." Thomas sighed. "He doesn't need to love it." She met his eyes. "Yes," she said quietly. "He does." Thomas reached for her hand. "He's helping us grow." She did not pull away, but she did not agree, because she had seen one final thing, something she never told Thomas. The week before, Harold had stood alone in the lobby. He thought no one was watching. His smile was gone. His face was empty. He ran his fingers slowly across the counter, and he whispered something under his breath, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. Almost. "This could be mine." Not said with hope, said with certainty. That was the moment Eleanor Whitcomb knew. Harold Bennett was not there to help them build something. He was there to wait, and eventually, to take it. The night Thomas Whitcomb realized the bank was no longer his began like any other. Quietly. Deceptively. It was late autumn, the kind of night where the cold pressed against the windows but hadn't yet found its way inside. Eleanor woke just after midnight and saw the light on in the kitchen. At first, she thought nothing of it. Thomas often stayed up late with paperwork. He believed problems could be solved if you simply stayed awake longer than they did. She lay there for a moment, listening. She did not hear the scratch of his pen, did not hear the turning of pages, only silence, and something else, breathing, uneven. She rose from bed and walked down the hallway. The kitchen light was harsh and yellow. Thomas sat at the table in his undershirt and slacks, his glasses low on his nose, papers spread around him like wreckage. His hands rested flat on either side of a single document. He was staring at it, not reading. Staring. As if it had spoken to him. "Thomas," she said softly. He didn't answer. She stepped closer. "Thomas." He blinked then, as if surfacing from deep water. He looked at her, and she saw something she had never seen before. Fear, not worry, not stress. Fear. "What is it?" she asked. His mouth opened slightly, closed, opened again. Finally, he whispered, "I didn't understand." Her stomach tightened. Understand what? He looked down at the paper. "Harold asked me to sign these months ago." His voice sounded far away. He said it was temporary, a protection, in case the bank faced regulatory pressure. Eleanor pulled out the chair beside him and sat down. "What did you sign?" He swallowed. "Everything." The word barely existed when he said it. She frowned. "What do you mean?" His eyes filled slowly, as though the truth was rising inside him against his will. "I signed over controlling shares." The room seemed to tilt. "He said it was collateral," Thomas whispered. His hands began to tremble. "I trusted him." Eleanor felt her own heart begin to pound. "Thomas," his voice cracked, "he owns the bank now." Silence filled the kitchen, heavy, suffocating. "No," she said. He nodded faintly. "Yes." He pushed the document toward her. She saw Harold's name. Clear, permanent, legal, real. "This isn't possible," she said. Thomas laughed then, a broken sound. "I thought the same thing." He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "I built this place." His voice hardened with confusion. "With my hands. With my life." He looked at her. "How can he own it?" She had no answer. He whispered, "He was in my office today." She listened. "He told me the board had voted." Thomas shook his head slowly. "There is no board." His voice dropped. "There was never a board." Understanding settled over her like winter. "He was the board," she said. Thomas nodded. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him. "He kept thanking me." Thomas said quietly. For my vision. His hands clenched. He said I had created something valuable. His voice broke completely. And then he took it. Eleanor reached for him. He pulled away. Not from her. From himself. I did this, he whispered. No. I signed it. You trusted someone you believed in. He looked at her, his eyes wet and full of something worse than grief. Shame. I failed you. The words landed between them like a wound. She grabbed his hand firmly. You did not fail me. I was supposed to protect you. His voice trembled. This bank was supposed to take care of you when I was gone. She tightened her grip. I never needed the bank. He looked at her helplessly. I needed you. I needed you. Tears slid down his face. He didn't wipe them away. I gave him our life, he said. She leaned closer. No, she said softly. He took it. Thomas stared at the paper again. I don't know who I am without it, she answered immediately. You're my husband. He closed his eyes, but the damage was already done. That night, Thomas Whitcomb sat at his own kitchen table and realized that everything he had built, everything he had believed in, everything he had trusted, belonged to someone else. And for the first time since Eleanor had known him, he looked like a man who understood that his love had not been strong enough to protect the person he had built it for. 8 months later, his heart stopped. But Eleanor would always believe. It was Harold Bennett who broke it. The funeral for Thomas Whitcomb was held on a gray morning that never quite became day. Clouds covered the sky in a dull, endless sheet, and the sun lingered somewhere behind them, unwilling to witness what was happening below. Ashford had only one funeral home. Brick. Modest. Familiar. It sat 3 streets over from the bank, close enough to walk, far enough to pretend they were not connected. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood, old carpet, and lilies that had opened too early. Thomas rested at the front of the room in a simple oak casket. He wore the navy suit Eleanor had helped him choose 20 years earlier, the one he had worn to their daughter's wedding. His hands were folded neatly across his chest, still, obedient, unrecognizable in their stillness. Eleanor sat in the front row, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap the same way his were folded in the casket. People filled the rows behind her, farmers, clerks, neighbors, people who had once shaken Thomas's hand across the bank counter and trusted him with their futures. They spoke in quiet voices, not because they didn't have words, because they had too many. A man named Walter Briggs stood first. His hands trembled as he faced the room. Thomas gave me a loan when nobody else would, Walter said. His voice cracked. I didn't have good numbers, didn't have much of anything. He swallowed, but he looked at me and said, Walter paused, gathering himself. He said, I trust the man more than the numbers. Walter wiped his eyes. That loan saved my farm. He looked at the casket. I hope he knew that. Another woman stood. Mrs. Galloway, her hair thinner now than it had been the day she brought in her husband's insurance check. He sat with me, she said softly. For 2 hours. Her voice shook. He didn't talk about money. She paused. He talked about grief. She smiled faintly through tears. He understood it before he ever had to. People nodded, quietly, gratefully, because they had all believed Thomas Whitcomb would live forever, and now they had to learn how to live in a town he no longer occupied. Then the pastor spoke. He talked about integrity, about kindness, about legacy. He said Thomas Whitcomb had been a steward of trust. Eleanor listened, but the words felt smaller than the man she had known. Halfway through the service, Eleanor felt a small hand slip into hers. She looked down. Her grandson, Michael, stood beside her. 8 years old, his suit too big, his face confused in the way children's faces become when the world stops making sense. Grandma, he whispered, Why is Grandpa sleeping there? Her heart broke quietly. She squeezed his hand. He's not sleeping, she said gently. Michael frowned. Then why doesn't he wake up? She could not answer immediately. Finally, she said, because he was very tired. Michael looked at the casket. He worked too hard. It wasn't a question. She nodded. Yes. He leaned against her arm. I'm glad he doesn't have to work anymore. She closed her eyes briefly. Not because he was wrong, because he was right. On her other side sat her granddaughter, Emily, 6 years old. Emily held a folded drawing in her lap. Carefully, protectively. After the pastor finished speaking, Emily stood on her own. She walked to the front of the room. The adults watched in silence. She placed the drawing on the casket. It was a picture of the bank, drawn in crayon, bright, happy, with a stick figure of Thomas standing beside it, smiling. Above it, she had written in uneven letters, Grandpa's Bank. Eleanor felt something inside her fracture permanently, because even in death, even in the mind of a child, it was still his. Then Harold Bennett stood. He walked slowly to the front, confident, composed. He wore a black suit that fit him perfectly. He folded his hands and looked out at the town. At times like this, Harold said solemnly, it's difficult to find words worthy of the man we've lost. His voice carried smoothly through the room. Thomas Whitcomb was a visionary. Eleanor stared at him. He built something extraordinary. Harold glanced briefly at the casket. And his contributions to this bank. He paused. And to this town. He placed his hand over his heart. Will never be forgotten. Eleanor felt her fingers tighten, because the words sounded right, but the man saying them was wrong. Harold continued. He trusted people. His voice softened. And that trust is the foundation we must continue to build upon. Eleanor heard the truth hiding inside the lie. Harold stepped away. People nodded. They accepted his words, because they needed to believe someone was still in control. But Eleanor knew better. She watched Harold return to his seat, watched him adjust his sleeve, watched him check his watch briefly, as if he had somewhere more important to be, as if Thomas Whitcomb's life were an appointment he needed to finish. Michael tugged her hand again. Grandma? Yes? Who's that man? He pointed at Harold. She looked at him, really looked at him, and she answered with quiet certainty. That's the man who owns the bank now. Michael frowned. But Grandpa built the bank. She squeezed his hand. Yes, she said. He did. The service ended. People left slowly, reluctantly, as if leaving would make the loss permanent. Eleanor remained seated until the room was empty, until it was just her, Thomas, and the silence between them. She walked to the casket, placed her hand gently over his, cold, unfamiliar. I'm still here, she whispered. Her voice did not break, not anymore. I'm still here. Behind her, through the window, she could see the bank in the distance, standing, waiting, occupied. And for the first time since Thomas had died, Eleanor Whitcomb felt something stronger than grief. She felt patience, because some things could be stolen, but not forever. And she would spend the rest of her life making sure of it. Eleanor began sitting on the bench 2 weeks after the funeral. At first, people stopped to talk, to comfort, to remember Thomas. But time passed. People forgot. The bank grew. Harold grew richer. The sign changed. Whitcomb Savings and Loan became Ashford Community Bank. Her name disappeared. But Eleanor kept coming. Every day. Watching. Waiting. People said she was lonely. They said she was grieving. They said she had nothing left. They were wrong. Eleanor Whitcomb had something Harold Bennett did not know about. Something he had forgotten. Something he had never seen. It was hidden in a flour tin in the back of her pantry. Thomas's handwriting, meticulous, Careful, permanent, not bank records, personal records, private transactions, conversations, agreements, notes, and one entry. Dated 6 months before Harold took the bank. Eleanor had read it 1,000 times. Thomas had written, Harold requested collateral restructuring. Something feels wrong. I will protect Eleanor if necessary. Protect Eleanor. He had, just not in the way anyone expected. Harold Bennett's office sat at the far end of the second floor. It had once been Thomas's office. The same window overlooked the square. The same afternoon light fell across the floor. But everything else had changed. The furniture was newer, sharper, colder. The warmth had been replaced by polish. Harold sat behind the desk Thomas had chosen 43 years earlier. He was reviewing loan summaries when his secretary's voice came through the intercom. There's a Mrs. Whitcomb here to see you. He froze, just for a moment. Then he pressed the button. Send her in. When Eleanor entered, she did not hesitate. She did not look around. She did not admire what he had done with the space, because to her, it was still her husband's office. Harold stood, polite, controlled, but his eyes betrayed something else, something unsettled. Mrs. Whitcomb, he said. She studied him. Time had aged him, softened his jaw, thinned his hair, but it had not softened what he was. Harold, she said calmly. She sat down without asking permission. He noticed. He sat slowly. They looked at each other across the desk. Two people connected by a history only one of them regretted. You look well, he said. It was the kind of sentence people used when they didn't know what else to say. I look old, she replied. He forced a faint smile. Ashford suits you. She tilted her head slightly. It suited Thomas. His smile faded. Silence stretched between them. He folded his hands. I was sorry to hear about your fall last winter. She blinked once. Were you? He hesitated. Yes, she nodded faintly. You sent flowers. He seemed relieved. I did. They were very expensive. He shifted slightly. You deserved something beautiful. She met his eyes. My husband deserved his bank. The words landed harder than either of them expected. Harold inhaled slowly. I know you believe that. Her voice remained calm. No, she said. I know it. He leaned back slightly. Careful. Measured. Thomas made his own decisions. She reached into her purse, removed the ledger, placed it gently on the desk between them. The sound of it touching the wood was soft, but final. Harold stared at it. His face did not change immediately, but his breathing did. What is that? He asked quietly. She rested her hands on her lap. You know what it is. He did not touch it. I haven't seen that in a long time. She nodded. 43 years. His eyes flicked up to hers. He tried to smile. It didn't work. Why bring it now? She answered simply. Because you thought I wouldn't. Silence. He looked at the ledger again, then back at her. You waited, he said. Yes. His voice dropped. For what? She held his gaze. For you to forget I was still here. Something inside him shifted then. Something fragile. You could have come sooner, he said. She shook her head faintly. No. Why not? Her answer was quiet. Because you wouldn't have been afraid yet? He swallowed. I'm not afraid. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. You took something that didn't belong to you, she said. His voice hardened slightly. I took control of a failing institution. She leaned forward just slightly. You took advantage of a good man. He exhaled through his nose. He signed the papers. She nodded. Yes. Her eyes did not leave his. He trusted you. He said nothing. She continued. He believed you loved the same things he loved. Harold's jaw tightened. This is business. She studied him. No, she said softly. It was personal. He looked away, out the window, toward the bench. His voice was quieter when he spoke again. What do you want, Eleanor? She considered the question. Then she said, I want you to remember his name. He frowned. I never forgot his name. She shook her head. You forgot what it meant. Silence filled the office. Heavy. Unavoidable. He looked at the ledger one more time, then back at her. You can't undo what's been done. She stood slowly. No, she agreed. She picked up her purse. But I can finish it. He watched her. For the first time since he had met her, he looked uncertain. She walked to the door, paused. Then she said, without turning around, You once told him he built something valuable. Harold's throat tightened. Yes, she opened the door. He did. And then she left, leaving Harold Bennett alone in an office that had never truly belonged to him, staring at a ledger that proved some things never stopped being hers. The investigation took 3 months. Quiet, careful, precise. The ledger showed things Harold thought were buried: illegal transfers, fraudulent leverage, asset manipulation, evidence, enough evidence. The day they came for him, Eleanor was sitting on the bench. She watched as 2 men in dark suits walked into the bank. Watched as Harold Bennett walked out between them. Watched as the town remembered. He saw her. For the first time in 42 years, he truly saw her. The men in dark suits let him stop in front of her. You waited, he said. Eleanor nodded. Yes. His voice cracked. Why? She answered simply. Because you thought I couldn't. 6 months after Harold Bennett was let out of the bank, he had stolen. The sign changed. It did not happen with ceremony. No speeches, no crowd, just a ladder, a screwdriver, and a man who worked quietly, removing letters that had never belonged. Ashford Community Bank. Gone. In its place, new letters were fastened carefully into the old brick, each one secured. Permanent. Whitcomb Community Bank. Some people in town called it symbolic. Others called it overdue. Eleanor called it nothing at all, because she understood something the town did not. A name was not an honor. A name was a return. She still sat on the bench every morning. Same time, same coat, same quiet patience. But she no longer watched the bank the same way. She did not watch it with grief. She watched it with recognition. One morning, as the sun rose gently over the square, she heard footsteps approach. Small ones, uneven. She looked down. Michael stood beside her. 9 years old now, a little taller, still wearing clothes he hadn't quite grown into yet. He looked at the bank, at the sign. He read it slowly. Whitcomb? He looked up at her. Grandma, he said. That's our name. She smiled faintly. Yes, she said. It is. He studied the building. Does that mean Grandpa built it again? Her throat tightened gently. She considered her answer carefully. No, she said. He never stopped building it. Michael thought about that, his young mind working through something larger than himself. He nodded slowly, as if somehow he understood. A moment later, Emily came running across the square. 8 now. Her hair pulled back with a ribbon that refused to stay straight. She held something in her hands, a piece of paper. Grandma, she said breathlessly, I have something to show you. She unfolded it carefully. Another drawing. This one more detailed than the last. The bank stood tall and proud, and beside it were 3 figures: a tall man, a small girl, and an old woman sitting on a bench. Above them, written in careful letters, Grandpa's Bank. Eleanor stared at it, her vision blurred slightly. Emily pointed at the tall figure. That's him, she said. Eleanor nodded. I know. Emily pointed at the bench. That's you. Eleanor smiled. Yes. Michael looked between the drawing and the real building. "Grandma," he asked quietly, "can we go inside?" The question hung in the air. 43 years earlier, Thomas had held that door open for her. 43 years earlier, it had been their future. She stood slowly, her legs stiff but certain. She reached out her hands. Michael took one, Emily took the other. Together, they walked across the square, each step steady, each step earned. When they reached the door, Eleanor paused. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, older, softer, but unbroken. She opened it. Inside, the air smelled the same: paper, wood, time. A young teller looked up and smiled warmly. "Good morning," she said. Then her eyes widened slightly. "Mrs. Whitcomb." Eleanor nodded. "Good morning." Michael stayed close to her side. He looked around in awe. "Grandma?" he whispered. "This is where he worked." She squeezed his hand. "Yes." Emily looked up at her. "Does he know we're here?" Eleanor's voice was soft. "Yes," she said. "I think he does." She walked to the counter, placed her hand on the wood Thomas had once sanded himself. She could almost feel his hands there, almost hear his voice, almost see the man who had built something out of love, never knowing how long that love would have to wait to come home. Michael looked up at her. "Grandma? Yes? Are you going to work here now?" She smiled. "No." He frowned slightly. "Why not?" She looked down at him, then at Emily, then around the bank. "I don't need to," she said. She rested her hand gently over his, "because it already belongs to us." Outside, the bench sat beneath the sycamore tree, empty now, no longer needed, because Eleanor Whitcomb was no longer waiting for the past. She was standing inside the future Thomas had built for her, and this time, it would never be taken away again. I hope you liked my story. What did you think of it? I want to hear where you are listening from. Leave me a comment below.